My name is Paul Plemons, and I live in Portland, Oregon, where I serve as a Catholic priest. I have always believed in God from the moment I was old enough to understand the world. I was taught that faith was the foundation of everything. My mother used to say, "Without God, we are nothing, Paul, remember that?" I held on to those words as I grew up, and by the time I was a teenager, I knew I wanted to dedicate my life to serving Him. Becoming a priest wasn't just a choice, it was a calling. At least that's what I told myself. I spent years in seminary studying scripture theology and church doctrine. I memorized prayers, performed rituals, and learned what it meant to be a shepherd for God's people when I was finally ordained. It felt like everything had fallen into place. I had a purpose, a mission. For years, I served in a small town in Mexico, a place where faith was woven into everyday life. The people there trusted me. They came to me for advice, for guidance, for comfort when life was too much to bear. I baptized their children, presided over their weddings, and blessed their homes on the surface. I was everything a priest should be, but deep inside, something never felt quite right. I didn't discuss it with anyone, since I felt that a priest should be a strong and steadfast tower of faith. But in the quiet moments, I tried to ignore these thoughts, telling myself they were just moments of weakness, but they never completely left me. One night, everything changed, starting like any other evening. The town had gone quiet. Most people had gone home with their families. I had finished my final prayers for the day, and I was alone in the church, sitting in front of the altar. The only sounds were the distant chirping of crickets outside and the faint hum of the wind moving through the cracks of the old stone walls. I prayed every day, led Mass with devotion, and followed every tradition passed down through the generations. But occasionally, I wondered if I truly knew God or if I was just going through the motions. Wooden doors, I recall peering into Jesus' eyes on the cross as I gazed up at the enormous crucifix above the altar. What am I missing? I closed my eyes and asked myself, why do I feel so distant from you? Then it happened. At first, it was just a slight pressure in my chest, nothing alarming, just enough to make me shift uncomfortably. I thought maybe I had been sitting too long, so I adjusted my posture, but the pressure grew stronger and spread like fire through my ribs. I was whispering a quiet prayer, asking for guidance, clarity, and anything to push away the feeling of emptiness. My vision clouded, the candlelight stretching into weird, distorted streaks, and I gasped, clutching my chest as the pain rushed down my arm. It felt like every last bit of strength in my body had been taken away. My legs refused to comply, and my breathing grew shallow as I attempted to lift myself up from the pew. The realization that my body was shutting down right here, in the very place I had dedicated my life to serving alone, with no one to call for help, hit me like a brick. I tried to reach out, my fingers brushing the altar, but my head was spinning and the world around me began to tilt. My heart was pounding in my ears, drowning out all other sounds, and I was dying, as if touching it would somehow keep me grounded, keep me here. But my strength was fading fast. My knees buckled and I collapsed onto the cold tile floor. My head struck the hard surface, but I barely registered the impact. All I could feel was the crushing weight in my chest, the burning in my lungs as I struggled for air. I wanted to call out, to say something, maybe a final prayer, maybe just a cry for help, but no words came. The edges of my vision darkened, my thoughts slowing like a fading echo, and then everything went still. No pain, no sound, just nothing. I don't know how long I was there floating in that emptiness. It could have been seconds, minutes, or even hours. Time didn't exist in that space. Then, slowly, something changed. A strange sensation washed over me, like I was being lifted, not physically, but in a way I had never felt before. I became aware of the room again, but not in the way I had known it before. It was as if I was seeing it from a different angle. And that's when I saw myself lying on the floor, completely still, my own body lifeless, below me. My mind was empty, my body numb, and it seemed like all the weight, the pain, and the noise of life had suddenly disappeared. However, what followed was something I could never have predicted. At first, I became aware of a slight sensation, like I was floating in water, weightless and detached, and gradually the darkness around me started to give way to something else. I didn't have a body, at least not in the sense that I understood it, but I could feel myself moving. I was lying on the cold tile floor of the church, motionless, my arms limp at my sides, my body looking small and fragile like a discarded shell, and the faint glow of the candles flickered across my pale face. The sensation of rising was strange, like being pulled upward by an invisible force, and I wasn't even sure I could resist. It was unreal to be there, and I could even see the tiny stain of blood where my skull had hit the floor. I was staring at myself, but I wasn't scared. I should have been freaking out, shouldn't I? Instead, I felt a strange calm, as if the chaos of the world had been left behind. I watched the scene below, unable to move closer or farther away, and the church around me felt different too, not just because of the angle, but also because of the atmosphere. The warm, familiar sanctuary where I had prayed, preached, and served for so many years felt strange. Then I noticed something else, a shadow that moved just beyond the reach of the candlelight flickering between the pews. At first, I assumed it was a trick of the light, but then I realized it was getting closer, and it wasn't alone. More importantly, even though I wasn't in my body, the calm I had felt moments before vanished as shadows started to creep out of the darkness like smoke. They moved strangely, their shapes changing and swirling as they got closer. I couldn't see faces or features, just shadows, but I could feel them. The air got colder and heavier, driven by an increasing feeling of fear. The shadows were audible to me, even if they didn't speak. Like a far-off wind conveying secrets, the whispers are quiet and chilly. Even though I couldn't understand what they were saying, the tone was enough to chill me. They were drawing me farther into the shadows and away from the altar's light. Yet I could feel the tug, like unseen hands snatching at my very existence. I fought it, but it was like trying to swim against a strong stream. The more I fought, the greater the pull got. My mind raced and panic struck as I realized I couldn't stop them. Was this where I was going to end up? I considered all of my sermons and the occasions I had cautioned people about the existence of spiritual warfare, but I had never really comprehended it until now. The shadows weren't merely darkness, they were something living, and they desired me. I had no voice, no body, and my mind cried out for assistance. So all I could do was watch as the shadows drew closer, their whispers turning into a low, menacing hum, and then, just as the darkness was about to swallow me, something happened. At first the light was dim, like a tiny spark in the distance, but it became brighter and stronger, slicing through the shadows like a blade. The darkness retreated, the shadows hissing and running away as the light expanded, and the weight that had been holding me down vanished in an instant, replaced by a war unlike anything I had ever experienced. The light was overwhelming, but not in a harsh way. It was radiant, pure and powerful, yet it felt gentle, as if it were embracing me. I felt drawn toward it and was unable to turn away or concentrate on anything else, but this time I didn't fight as I approached. The whispers of the shadows vanished entirely, to be replaced by a quiet that was almost melodic. It was serene and tranquil, yet there was also a sense of expectation that something remarkable was about to happen. The closer I got, the more I sensed its presence in the light. It wasn't just light for the sake of light, it was alive, full of power and love, and it was calling to me for the first time since I had left my body. I didn't feel lost or afraid. Instead, I couldn't help but feel drawn to something much bigger than myself, and I realized then that this wasn't a dream or an accident. He was standing at the center of the light, a figure radiant yet distinct, as though he were both part of the light and its source. His features were clear but seemed to carry something more than what my eyes could fully grasp. I was drawn towards something divine that would change me forever, and the light kept drawing me closer and closer, surrounding me with warmth and peace unlike anything I had ever experienced. As I moved deeper into it, I became aware of a presence so overwhelming and profound that I knew I was approaching something far beyond my comprehension. His face exuded kindness and love, but there was also an indisputable authority and strength about him that made everything else seem unimportant. I stopped moving, if you can call it that, and just stood or existed in awe of Javier. He said my name sounded like nothing I had ever heard, not just a voice, but a calling, a knowing, as though he was speaking straight into my soul. Javier, he said again, and this time I felt the weight of it. Not condemnation, not anger, just truth. And I was at a loss for words. I had spent my entire life talking about Jesus, preaching about his teachings, encouraging others to follow him, and now here I was fully prepared. He stepped closer, and the love radiating from him was almost too much to handle. It wasn't a love I had earned or deserved. It was just there, overwhelming and unconditional. You have served me, Javier. You have dedicated your life to my work, he said in a gentle but firm voice. I had studied scripture for decades leading Mass, so naturally I knew him. The question struck me like a thunderclap, and my mind raced for an answer, teaching people about Jesus' life and sacrifice. But while I was standing there with him, I came to a dreadful realization. Even though my remarks seemed hollow and feeble, I was able to declare that I didn't really know him as well as I thought I did. You know about me, he said, in a gentle yet piercing tone. You know the stories, the rituals, the words, but have you ever truly known me? Have you sought my heart, or have you only followed my rules? Jesus looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as sorrowful yet hopeful, as if he already knew my answer but was waiting for me to realize it for myself. The truth of what he said pierced me like a blade. I had dedicated my life to the church's rituals, structure, and traditions, and I had gauged my faith by how well I adhered to its rules. However, had I ever genuinely sought a relationship with him? Had I ever allowed myself to know him beyond the words on paper? Tears filled my eyes as the weight of it all fell. I reflected on all the sermons I had given, all the suggestions. I don't know, I whispered in a trembling voice. I thought I was doing what you wanted. I thought I was serving you. I had told others to trust in Jesus numerous times, but I had been too scared to do the same myself. Jesus reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of his touch gave me comfort and the conviction that you had done many good things. But faith is not just about what you do. It's about who you are, with me. It's about knowing me, loving me, and it's about letting that love guide everything you do, Javier said. I couldn't contain my tears any longer, and I collapsed to my knees in front of him. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I felt like I was doing enough, but now I realized that I was missing the most important thing. It's not too late. Jesus knelt down with his face near mine, his eyes full of love. Javier remarked that you can still stroll with me and get to know me, not just for me. His remarks served as a lifeline, rescuing me from the abyss I had descended into. I continued, staring up at him through tears. This was the first time I realized the difference between the faith I had practiced and the faith he was calling me to. It wasn't about the rituals, the structure, or even the position I held as a priest. It was about him teaching me. Jesus said, "Teach me how to know you," and the light seemed to shine brighter all around us at that same moment. This is the beginning. When Javier said, "But there's much more to see," the environment around us started to change once more, and I felt as though I was being pulled closer to him. The light around me changed, growing richer and deeper, as if it contained layers of meaning that I wasn't yet able to understand. I sensed that Jesus was going to reveal something significant that would permanently alter me as he stood before me in his unshakable presence. Before I could reply, the light changed once more, and all of a sudden I was no longer standing in its warmth. Javier continued in a soft yet stern voice. "You've spent your life serving me, but there is a deeper truth you need to see." Instead, I was watching scenes from my own life as if I were looking through a window. In one scene, I was blessing a family's new home. The mother held her baby tightly, and her eyes were filled with gratitude as I sprinkled holy water and prayed over them. At the time, I felt proud of my role as their priest, believing I was bringing God's presence into their lives. However, as I watched the scene unfold, I realized I had rushed through the blessing because I was preoccupied with the next appointment on my calendar and hadn't taken the time to truly listen to them in order to understand their hopes or fears. The picture changed, and I found myself preaching in a packed church, emphasizing the value of faith and obedience. I had carried out the ritual, but I hadn't been there with them. I had preached that lecture innumerable times with the assurance that I was. As the scenes continued to play, I noticed moment after moment where I had focused on the church's traditions and outward manifestations of faith, while missing the deeper needs of the people I was called to serve. It wasn't that the rituals were wrong, they had their place, but I had made them the center of my ministry instead of making Jesus the center. I noticed faces in the crowd that I hadn't noticed before, faces full of doubt, pain, and longing. They weren't looking for rules or rituals. They were searching for something deeper, something real, and I hadn't seen it. Tears started to well up in my eyes as I watched it. Javier, Jesus asked in a voice that broke through my emotional burden. Faith is about the love you live, not the things you do. Rituals are supposed to guide you, but all too frequently they take precedence over the means. I nodded, unable to express that his words were unquestionably true, and they led me to my call after I had believed that being a good priest meant doing the rituals according to the regulations and upholding the church's customs. But I now realize how naive that belief had been. As Jesus went on, the scenes changed once more. This time, I saw instances where I had truly lived out his love without even realizing it. Sitting with an elderly woman who had just lost her husband and holding her hand while she sobbed. Giving the last rites to a young man in a hospital with his family gathered around him, their faces etched with sorrow, and helping a poor farmer repair his roof after a storm. My hands blistered from the work. The church is not an institution, Javier. It is my body. It is the people who seek me, who love me, and who love me and one another. Jesus stated that these were the moments when your heart was in alignment with mine, not because of what you were doing, but because of how you were loving. I experienced a mix of, as I observed these scenes, I felt both amazement and shame, awe at the ability of love to illuminate the darkest moments, and shame at how infrequently I had let that love fully lead me for every genuine connection. There were innumerable instances in which I had failed to put the structure of my role ahead of the core of my mission. Javier, I don't condemn you. I understand your heart and the hardships you've borne. But now that you realize the truth, you must make a decision, he said. You can continue as you were doing well, but never fully knowing me, or you can let go of the traditions that have held you back and step into the fullness of my love. I responded in a shaking voice, yes. He also indicated that you can lead people to me by living a life that reflects my grace rather than via rituals. Words weighed heavily on me, and I realized there was no going back. For so long, I believed that my job as a priest was to uphold the church, but I was unable to unsee what he had shown me or unlearn the truth. With my voice breaking with emotion, I said, I want to choose you. I want to truly know you, to live for you. Jesus smiled, and it seemed like the light around him glowed even brighter than before. Now I realize it was about something much bigger, pointing people to Jesus and helping them get to know him as I was getting to know him. The doubts, fears, and questions that had tormented me for so long started to fade. They weren't gone entirely, but they no longer controlled me. Javier, and trust that I will guide you every step of the way. As he spoke, I felt a warmth fill my chest, a sense of peace and purpose that I had never known before. This marked the start of something new and genuine. The light surrounding us started to change once more, and I sensed that my journey was far from over. I still had more to see and comprehend, but for the first time in my life, I felt prepared and unafraid as the light around me stabilized. I stood there, still feeling overwhelmed by everything I had just witnessed, the weight of my decisions, faith, and doubts pressing down on me, but at the same time, duration. For the first time, there was an unquestionable sense of clarity. I realized what had been lacking, and my heart ached to cling to this knowledge indefinitely. Jesus moved closer, and I could sense that something important was going to happen, something that would completely alter the course of my life. Because his eyes were full of love and purpose. What you have seen here is not just for you, but for them, for all those who are searching, for those who are lost, and for those who have placed their faith in the wrong things. Javier remarked in a calm yet kind voice. I nodded, not sure how to react as my head was filled with inquiries. How could I, after years of concentrating on customs and rituals, guide others to something more profound? How could I possibly live up to the reality he had revealed to me? My ideas seemed to be heard by Jesus before I could express them. He lifted his hand and stated, "You are not being called to be perfect. You are being called to be faithful. It is not your strength that will carry this mission. It is mine." Suddenly, the light surrounding us changed once more. Suddenly, I was no longer standing in the serene, bright area. Instead, I was looking down on our world as though from above. It wasn't a vision of actual landscapes or nations, but rather of people's hearts, lives, and souls. I saw people going about their daily lives, their faces filled with a quiet despair. Some were burdened by poverty, others by loneliness or loss. Many were surrounded by the comforts of life, but they all felt empty inside. The details varied, but the core was the same. A deep yearning for something more genuine. I saw churches, some full and others almost empty. In many of them, the emphasis was on the rites, the words uttered, the hymns sung, and the traditions upheld. But I could sense the lack of genuine connection. It was like a hollow shell, beautiful on the outside, but lacking the substance that gave it meaning. Moments of sincere faith were interspersed throughout the gloom like tiny lights. A young man choosing to forgive rather than lash out at a stranger, a mother praying over her child. Being helpful to someone in need was a simple act that the world frequently overlooked, yet it had great impact. As the vision progressed, I felt a great deal of sorrow for those who were lost in tradition and thought they were doing enough by following the rules, but had never truly known Jesus' love. I now understood what he meant when he said, "It is not too late." These people weren't hopeless. They just needed someone to show them the way. They embodied the core of what Jesus had been teaching me, that faith is about love, humility, and connection, rather than grand displays or strict practices. "This is the world I came to save, and this is the world I am calling you to serve," Jesus remarked, his voice piercing the vision. I turned back to him and started crying, but how? My voice trembled as I said, "How can I reach them? How can I help them see what I've seen?" Jesus smiled, his face full of conviction and encouragement. "You now know that I love you," he answered, reminding them that their value lies in who they are in me rather than what they do, and walking with them rather than over them, like seeds placed in fertile soil. His words took root in my heart. I wasn't sure how I would carry out this mission, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Before I could speak again, I was given the responsibility of spreading this message and this truth because the world needed it. I felt Jesus put his hand on my chest, directly over my heart, and the warmth instantly swept through me like a wave of serenity and energy as the light brightened and enveloped us both. Javier spoke in a tone that was both authoritative and sympathetic. As his hand settled on my chest, I felt a shift within me. It was as though a veil had been lifted, enabling me to see the world and my purpose with clarity. "You are not alone. I will be with you in every step, every word, and every moment. Trust me, and I will lead you." I had no idea the uncertainties and anxieties that had previously prevented me from moving on were still present, but the great feeling of love, optimism, and resolve that now filled me overcame them, and they lost their power. The light surrounding us started to change again, and I realized that my time here was running out. Before the light completely went out, Jesus said one last time, and I would have to return to my body, my life, and the task that Jesus had given me. Even as I felt the weight of my physical body returning, the peace of his presence remained with me. "Remember, Javier, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know, and have always known you." With those words, the light went out, and I felt as though I was being gently lowered back into the world I had left behind. I had no idea what lay beyond, but I knew that I was no longer the same man I had been. I had been given a mission, and I knew I couldn't let him down. When I returned, the first thing I heard were voices, which at first seemed faint and muffled, as though they were coming from a great distance. Slowly they became clearer. Urgent voices spoke in quick, worried tones. My chest felt heavy, my body was weak, but I was alive. I opened my eyes and squinted against the harsh fluorescent light above me. The hospital machines beeped softly around me, and I could feel the steady pulse of something cold running through the IV in my arm. A nurse leaned over me and said, "You're awake, Pod." The word felt heavier than it should have, but I wasn't just awake physically. I was awake spiritually in a way I had never been before. The memories of what had just happened, the light, the encounter with Jesus, and the mission he had given me were as vivid as the room I was in now. The nurse moved aside as a doctor entered, and he spoke quickly about my condition, saying something about a heart attack and how they had almost lost me. I nodded, not really listening because my thoughts were elsewhere, and I talked about how it was a wonder I had lived, repeating each word. After the doctor left, I was by myself for a while. I stared at the ceiling, feeling as though I had died. I had stood in front of Jesus, and now I had been given another chance, not just at life, but at living with purpose. The next few days were a blur as parish friends came to visit and offered their prayers and support. They called me lucky to be alive, and I smiled and thanked them, but deep down, I knew that this wasn't just luck, but something much greater. As soon as I was well enough, I tried to describe my experience to my fellow priests. I talked about the light, the visions, and the realization that faith is about really knowing Him, rather than about titles or traditions. The majority of them listened courteously, but immediately ignored it, stating that it was probably only a dream and the result of my mental tension. These events occurred during near-death experiences. I couldn't ignore it, but one of them said in a kind but condescending tone, "Don't take it too personally. The beginning of my new ministry began when I returned to the church. I knew that things couldn't go back to the way they were. I couldn't just lead Mass, perform the rituals, and go through the motions. My heart had changed, and I knew that my work had to reflect that." A few parishioners, friends, and Padre listened intently, their eyes full of wonder. One woman said, her voice shaking, "Do you think Jesus is really calling us to something different? He's calling all of us not to follow rituals blindly, but to truly know Him, to live with love, humility, and compassion." In addition to praying, I spent more time with the sick, the impoverished, and the lost, demonstrating the love of Christ by my deeds. My sermons also changed. I no longer discussed following the church as the ultimate goal, but rather talked about Jesus, the relationship we could have with Him, and how He longs to know us personally. I encourage people to seek Him out not just through rituals, but also through their hearts. Some people welcomed this change, saying they felt closer to God than ever before, while others resisted, holding on to the traditions they had known their entire lives. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I wasn't doing enough, or that I wasn't fulfilling the mission Jesus had given me. But in those moments, I recalled His words, "You are not alone. I will guide you." Unquestionably, as the months went by, the parish saw changes. People who had before felt disengaged from their faith started to find new purpose in their relationship with God. Families got closer, neighbors were more sympathetic, and the church evolved from a structure to a community, in my opinion. I discovered a tranquility I had never experienced before, and the uncertainties that had previously plagued me were replaced by a calm assurance in Christ's love. I no longer judged my value by my performance of the rites or my position as a priest. I knew now that my worth was in Him, and that was enough. One evening, as I sat in the empty church, the candles flickering softly around me, I thought back to the moment I had fallen to the floor that night. I remembered the pain, the fear, and the darkness that had surrounded me. But more than that, I remembered the light, the overwhelming, radiant light of His presence. Faith, I realized, was never meant to be about titles or traditions. It was always meant to be about Him, about knowing Him, loving Him, and letting that love transform every part of our lives. As I knelt before the altar, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for myself, but for the people I had been called to serve. Lord, help me to show them what you have shown me. Help me to lead them to you. And in that moment, I felt His presence again, as real and as powerful as it had been that night. I knew then that I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what I had been called to do. The journey wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. God bless you all, and thank you.